Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House and today's book talk Dog Park with Sofi Oksanen. Dog Park was published in September by Knopf, and copies can be found at your local independent store, like our collaborator, Politics and Prose, based out of the Washington, D.C. area. I would also like to extend my thank you to Knopf for helping make this event possible. This talk is being recorded and will be made available on our website, scandinaviahouse.org, as well as our YouTube page. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We'll get to them towards the end of the program. A link to where one can purchase the books at Politics and Prose websites, as well as other books from Sofi Oksanen, will be also added in the chat box. Miss Oksanen is a Finnish-Estonian novelist and playwright. She has received numerous prizes for her work, including the Swedish Academy Nordic Prize, the Prix Feminina Antage, the Budapest Grand Prize, the European Book Prize, and the Nordic Council of Literature Prize. Moderating today's talk is Bethanne Patrick. She's a writer and book critic whose work appears frequently in the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, and many others. She features literary and translation in her Lit Hub column, Books You May Have Missed, and is a board member of Penn Faulkner Foundation and the 1455 Literary Arts. Patrick, who has visited and loves Helsinki, also belongs to the Finnish Embassy's Platinum Diplomatic Sauna Society, as well as its new Diplomatic Salva Society. Her book, Life Be, will be published in 2022. Follow her on Twitter and Instagram at The Book Maven. So please welcome Ms. Sofi Oksanen and Bethanne Patrick.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you so much. Sofi Oksanen, it is a pleasure and an honor to speak with you again. And this time, not in person in Helsinki, but via Zoom across the continents. And I am really grateful to have the chance to speak about Dog Park with you. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure and lovely to see you again. And now I can't see the audience, but I wave to you.
Yes, exactly. I think they keep it that way. We are less distracted, right? When it's just the two of us, But hello, audience, absolutely. The first thing I want to ask, Sofi, is to have you describe Dog Park in your own words for the audience. It's a novel about Russia and Ukraine, and some other places, including Helsinki, and involves a narrator who has many, many issues going on, and you peel back the layers a bit. So please tell us about Dog Park.
It's about two women who used to be friends, but friends, they are no more. So it's about lost friendship, betrayal, and about haunting past they both have. The themes are universal, but the particular subject in the novel is the fertility business, which is booming in Ukraine. But I use it as a platform or a lens to explore the consequences of corruption in everyday life of ordinary people, and also raising some questions about ethical issues and women's and children's rights related to these topics.
That is an absolutely wonderful summation, because the corruption is so important, but so are the women's and children's rights. And these are things, particularly the rights of women and children, that I think run through much of your work. Would you agree with that? Is that something that lifts you up as a writer?
Definitely, yes. I always try to, I'm not looking for those stories. I have a feeling that stories come to me, or the destinies or certain voices, they just come to me. But usually I'm more fascinated by the stories that I'm not into the headlines, the stories that make the headlines, but more about the stories behind the headlines, or what has happened before a news breaks to the world, or what happens afterwards. Because, all the huge headlines or something that is stirring the nation or the world, like war, for example, then if there's kind of nothing new happening, then it disappears from the news, and yet the war might be still going on. Like, for example, in Eastern Ukraine right now, there are people dying while they are defending democracy, but it's not like headline anymore. So
Right.
in that way, I think literature is a place where you can be much more multi-layered also than
Yes.
just one headline.
Speaking of multi-layered, the fertility industry is incredibly complex, and it has so many different parts. As I said to you a little earlier, we all know about adoption in Eastern Europe and the US, the former USSR and its nations. We all know about people who are looking for IVF treatments, but I didn't realize how common it was for Americans and other Westerners to come to a place like Ukraine and have implantation done and select from books full of pictures and biographies of young women who are desperate to make money and have decided to donate their eggs, which is, for anyone who doesn't understand about this, a long, arduous process that has complications for the present and also for a woman's reproductive future. It's
definitely, yes.
Yes,
yep.
Please talk about it and how it came to be the news that got to you to make this story.
Yeah, I didn't know much about, or practically nothing about, fertility industry before I noticed, while I was writing my previous novel, I came across a detail that started to bother me, and that is the family code in Ukraine. I noticed that it was unusually liberal. It was so liberal that, for example, if a customer, whether a local or a foreigner, comes to Ukraine and wants to have a baby with the help from fertility industry, then you can choose the gender of your child, for example.
Oh my goodness.
And then there are no age limits at all. I mean, in those countries where fertility treatments are legal, then there's usually some sort of age limit, but it doesn't matter if you are 80 years old, then it's totally fine to have a baby, in Ukraine, with a little help from medical experts.
Yes.
And for example, in many countries nowadays, anonymous donation is not possible anymore. But of course, it's possible in Ukraine. And what makes it also the surrogacy in Ukraine particular is the birth certificate of the intended child. The baby who is born out of surrogacy gets a birth certificate that has only the names of the intended parents and not the surrogate mother at all, which is highly unusual when you think about those countries where surrogacy is legal.
Yes.
So the surrogate mother is totally erased from the system. And there were so many things that, I was like, okay, first of all, I was a bit embarrassed that I was not aware of this. Then I was like, how is this possible? I mean, Ukraine is a European country, practically in the middle of Europe. They have a strong church, for example, and church usually has something to say about fertility issues.
Yes.
And I was really surprised. So it started to bother me, and I wanted to explore it more.
It's something that winds up having so many tentacles in Dog Park. It is no spoiler to say that Dog Park functions as an actual place in Helsinki, in the Sitsara neighborhood, but it also functions as a metaphor for what is happening in the lives of the families involved in the novel. And so let's talk a little bit first about your narrator's family and their lives before it was Ukraine, when it was still the USSR. And these, the timeline was difficult for me to pierce out as a person in the US. It's, and I don't know why, because I know the years. I know that in 2006, there was no USSR. I know in 1996, there was no USSR, but the parents and the grandparents did live under the Soviet system, and it carries in not just in their memories, but into their behavior. And you do this very, very gently and very quietly, so that it's not, you know, look at this, this is a result of USSR behavior, but you show that people who are affected by trauma, which is what living under that kind of system can give you, that it goes all through their lives and even into their children. And so your narrator has a father who worked in a place called a kopanka. And I don't know, if I don't pronounce something correctly, Sophie, let me know. But there is,
no problems.
It's a place called Snizhne, and that's in Ukraine, correct? And so tell us about these illegal mines and what this is happening in, you know, even the 21st century. This is not something that goes back to the 50s or the 20s and, you know, that kind of thing.
No, Ukraine has extremely rich natural resources, and if now it's the income in Ukraine is poorest in Europe. But it could be a very rich country. It could be a welfare state for every single one, because it has riches, it has excellent soil, and it has one of the largest coal basins in the world. So that was the reason why industrialization really shaped the landscape and the identity of Eastern Ukraine, where now Russia is waging its war against Ukraine. And that is also these riches, the natural resources, military industry, and the coal are, of course, also the reasons why Russia is interested in Ukraine. Sometimes I think that, you know, Estonia, for example, was lucky in that way that they don't really have natural resources. So it was perhaps easier for them to, you know, get into the European Union and
that
NATO.
Is ironic. Yes, very. And one of the things that is so tragic about the book is this family keeps thinking they're going to find the way to become richer and more westernized. And even when the narrator gets to the point where she is making a good living, it's all based on corruption.
Definitely, yes. And that is what Ukraine, the stories related to corruption in Ukraine are sometimes so absurd that it's very difficult to even, you know, to believe them. But since the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, there's been definitely a change for better. But still, I mean, because the corruption goes to so every level of life and health industry, for example. So it's very difficult to get rid of it. And it's also very difficult not to be involved with corruption simply.
Yes.
So in that way, it's difficult to live your life without using corruption to some extent. And yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that is what I wanted to write about, not like, you know, underlining that, yeah, this is corruption, but, you know, just, you know, in your everyday life chores, how it affects. And also the illegal mines in Eastern Ukraine. There are so many people working there, and it is extremely dangerous work. It's dangerous work because the safety precautions, of course, are not what they should be. There are all the time dangerous accidents as well. There are, and also these kopankas, which are kind of family coal mines, they are also illegal because the coal in eastern Ukraine is so close to the ground that, you know, you could have a little coal mine in your backyard. So so that is why it's very important for the people, because there's not much work, you know, in eastern Ukraine. So, and also, you know, pensions might be paid or might not be paid. The money the students get for the stipendium is a very small one. So it's people really need the money from these mines. But of course, if something goes wrong, then there's no health insurance for you. There's no one, you know, to make sure that you'll be okay. And there are plenty of children working there. So they might get $1 a day, for example. So it's not like big money, but that is how they survive. And as you can imagine, that if children need to go to the illegal mine to work at the same time when they should be actually at school, then it's not exactly the best childhood, let alone, you know, that the options regarding your future might be a little bit limited.
And this is not something we think when we think of child labor, we think of Southeast Asia, we think of sweatshops. We don't think of something in a country that is so westernized, in a country that is so civilized and developed and has things that we can relate to. It's very difficult, I think, for people in the United States, in North America, to understand that this is just as much an injustice as something happening, you know, in Vietnam in a small sweatshop. This is the same.
Definitely, yes. And it's also something that, you know, Europeans do not think that child labor belongs to Europe. Well, definitely. That's not our image of Europe at all. And it's quite exceptional in that way, but that also in Ukraine it is very difficult to get a legal job without, you know, right connections, and sometimes you have to pay to get the legal job, and it might be very expensive. And the legal job, then you might, you know, have better security regarding your health or so on, but you have to pay to get the legal job. So that is it's sad, of course.
It's very sad and very hard. But, you know, the other thing that it reminded me of recently, of course, you know about our TV show, The Sopranos. And we have this new movie that was made about The Sopranos called The Many Saints of Newark, which is a prequel. And what is interesting to me is in reading Dog Park, just around the time that I saw this movie, there are young, tough kids in Dog Park who extract money from, you know, the mothers and the old ladies in the neighborhood to keep them safe, right? This is just like the kids in the 1960s and 1970s in these Cosa Nostra groups in the United States. It's very scary. And in, you know, those of us who don't live that way, not to say that our lives are built on perfect anything, but those of us who don't have that kind of tie in our lives think, oh my goodness, this is terrible. How can this happen? And as you said a few minutes ago, Sophie, this is the way you have to live. If you want to be in your home, and you want things to be quiet and safe so you can make, you know, your daily meals and do your shopping, maybe you have to pay something to someone to keep your house from being robbed. You know?
Definitely, yes. Security is connected to right connections in Ukraine. And actually, now we come to the name of Dog Park. The name of Dog Park, the title of the novel, of course, dogs are excellent and old unknown symbols for loyalty, for example. And then when we think about the fertility business and then the breeding of the dogs, and there's a connection. There are designer puppies and there are designer babies as well. But one of the reasons as well why I gave the novel this title is connected to different how people see dogs in Western country like Finland, and then in a country like Ukraine.
Yes.
For example, in Finland, let alone other Nordic countries, there are no stray dogs at all.
Right.
We don't have stray dogs. But when you go to quite many Eastern European countries and Ukraine, there are plenty of stray dogs. So in a way, stray dogs are also part of the audio world of the country because you can hear them. And also another thing is that there are plenty of guard dogs. So there are guard dogs like everywhere. Of course, in a country where you cannot really trust the official authorities or the police forces, then it's good to have a guard dog. I mean, the dog is on your side and you don't have to pay the dog, just feed it. And then again, in Finland, of course, we do have guard dogs as well, but it's not something that, person who's living in a house, you think, oh, I need to have a guard dog, just to keep yourself safe. So in that way, I think animals and pets are reflecting quite many things in the society and tells what kind of society you are living in.
This is so interesting because when I started to read Dog Park, it happens that I have a miniature schnauzer. And so I thought, why is the schnauzer here in the family? Sophie isn't going to name a breed without, and I thought, as you said a few minutes ago, designer dogs, designer babies. Dogs are one of the things left that we feel it's okay to breed for something. And in the United States, we pretend that, of course, we are not trying to have designer babies. We're not trying, people have whatever they have, a baby is a blessing. It's very, sweet in this cloying way. And yet our dogs, we have no problem having a dog that has been very specially bred to have only this or that characteristic. And it's something that works in Dog Park, as you say. It's an important theme. And so this brings us more also to the fertility industry and what is happening with the two women at the center of the story. So the narrator has been looking for work, and she has tried some things. She was a model, very beautiful, very, very, and not highly educated, but sophisticated. She can speak French and English. She has some things that she knows. And she finds this work on a pole, this bit of paper, and calls a number. And before she knows it, she is caught up in donating her eggs and then becoming an office manager for the people who are operating this this entire business, this particular business. And I was wondering how you learned about that. Now, I know you already said you found out about the topic, you learned about the news, but how did you research what it's like, the way that these young women go into this and how they are recruited, what they're told?
Research for books, it's always pretty much the same. I mean, it's usually reading and talking to people, and then trying to find research about the themes or the subjects that I'm writing about. The Soviet history was something I knew already. I've been working with that for a long time. So, but then again, the Ukrainian history was not something I did know the Soviet Union, but not actually, the Ukraine that well. So I had a lot of help from Ukrainians, and luckily I also have a friend who's Ukrainian who happens to read Finnish, which was very important to me because I write in Finnish, and I wouldn't, I probably wouldn't have dared to write a novel about related to Ukraine that not a single Ukrainian had read before it goes out in the world. So without him, I probably wouldn't have dared, because there's the biggest. I mean, you can read research, you can read papers, you can talk to people, but for example, some gestures are something that you don't know if you might not know if it's typical for a certain culture or a country or to a person, or how people address each other.
Yes.
So that's those kind of things are most challenging actually for an author, if you're writing about history or if you are writing about another country. On the other hand, the distance is a good thing for an author.
Yes.
So I think in that way, the distance is definitely one of the key factors. If you are really living in your subject matter, then it might be actually difficult to write it in a way that it would make sense to the others. So yeah, but actually there's quite a lot of research about donation and surrogacy as well. Of course, I had to read research about it as well. But what makes it, of course, the topic a bit challenging is that Ukraine, like other countries having problem with corruption, are countries where they don't really have statistics, or if they have, you cannot really trust them. This is getting definitely better since the revolution. I mean, there was a reason why people wanted to get rid of the former president and so on. But so now we are getting more statistics. But what I find problematic is that when you think about fertility industry and international industry as such, that we don't really have reliable statistics about this industry.
No, and because many people, of course, don't want anyone back home to know that this is what they're doing, and so they're not reporting. Yeah, and so it becomes part of the corruption. And one of the things that is fascinating to me about Dog Park, I thought at first, okay, this is a novel about the fertility industry, and it's going to be a terrible story about how someone, loses her child. And yes, there is some of that there, no spoilers, but it's also a book about oligarchs. And it's a book about their reach. And this is truly frightening. This is not, the silly oligarch of a James Bond movie. This is someone who very quietly can do whatever he or she wants to do. Mostly he, unfortunately. Well, maybe fortunately. Anyway, what does it mean to have a country that is so tangled up in this kind of power?
Well, since the revolution, Ukraine has made it. I mean, the people are really fighting for their democracy. They are fighting to belong to Europe and not to Russia.
Yes.
And that is definitely the only solution if they want to get rid of the corruption, simply. And it's a there's so much Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs that are just exploiting the country. It's very colonial behavior.
Yes.
And that is also why it is very important to have the international mutual understanding of sanctions, for example. Because, I mean, of course, there are a lot of people who say that, okay, they don't care about sanctions, the oligarchs, but they do. I mean, they care about money simply.
Yes.
If you make their business more difficult, then it does hurt them, and it does hurt their wives, for example, who want to travel to do the shopping in Paris or in London or in New York, for example. So if they can't do that, they will be annoyed. But it's also, we do have, I think, an international responsibility about this issue, because we have let the corrupt money to be invested in Western companies and enterprises. We have let them buy with the corrupt money newspapers, for example, bookstore change, so many things that actually it's not good that the media houses, for example, are owned by Russian corrupt money. It's not a good thing. And of course, thanks to these kind of things, there are so many things. Also, this corruption is like, it's like a snake that will somehow smuggle itself into your society, and it's in that way it's definitely an international problem. It's not a problem that is hurting only Ukraine. It's a problem
that is so important. I think that's so important to Dog Park also. And I one thing I want to say about that is, number one, of course, completely correct. It's affecting all of us. But one of the things I truly appreciated, maybe you weren't going for this, because sometimes I talk to authors and I say, oh, you did this because, and the author says, no, I was just writing. But you have these chapters that are sometimes interrupted by very short pieces, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes even a single sentence. And when you're talking about the snake, I think, oh, these are the little curves. These are the serpentine parts of Dog Park where things change, where just a few words completely shift the story. And that's really remarkable, because you have, big, meaty, long scenes, and then all of a sudden, just saying one or two quiet things, the narrator brings us back to her past, with her parents and her grandmother, or she brings us, to the present in Helsinki with Daria. It's a really interesting technique, I think, that you found there, because your writing is not experimental, but it's also not commercial. It's very literary and thoughtful. And so would you tell us a little bit about what that's like for you? And perhaps you might just pick up your pen and write the whole book in one day, Sophie. I'm sure that's not true, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the juxtaposition of length in the book.
It's always very difficult to say, when do you actually start writing the novel? I mean, I do know the exact date when I have created the first file, but usually the story is somewhere in your subconscious somehow. So, for example, the Dog Park, the starting point of the Dog Park might be like, the first time I had borщ, the Ukrainian soup, as a child. In Estonia, it's a very popular soup as well. So It's very difficult to say, or perhaps the starting point was when my Finnish father was working actually in Ukraine during the Soviet era, and he bought gifts for me and brought these Ukrainian handicrafts. I remember very well. So perhaps, it might have been those little moments, even though you might not, of course, as a child, I didn't think that, okay, I'm going to write about Ukraine. I'm going to write about this kind of story. But, all these different things are kind of, connect like dots and then there will be a day when certainly the dots start to make sense. Yes. And there's a story that has been looking for me. For example, Dog Park, kind of the one of the starting points, of course, was when I started to think about that family code, which is unusually liberal in Ukraine.
Yes.
But also, I wanted to write about migrant issues related to the collapse of Soviet Union, and also when you think about the fertility business in Ukraine, then how the country ended up having that kind of law is also kind of one of the consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union, because they had to create a new legal system, and when that's problem in all Eastern European countries and in Baltic states as well, that when you had to get rid of the Soviet law, which was totally not suitable for the countries that had just regained the independence and the end of occupation after they needed a new law, and that meant that there will be holes. There will be excellent holes for dirty businessmen. And also the non-existing social welfare system is also one of the consequences of the collapse of Soviet Union. So I wanted to write about these was as well, but how the story takes the shape is another thing, because I don't know when I start writing the story. I don't know what kind of story it's going to be. I have no idea what's going to happen to the characters. I might know, like, for example, decade when the story is taking place, but I don't know whether I'm going to write more about the past, the previous decades, or what kind of. So the first version is always that's the fun part. A fun part of the whole process, because then I'm so excited to get to know the characters. I have no idea who's going to fall in love with who's going to die, what's going to happen to these characters. So this kind of, getting to know the characters and finding their voice. And then when I found their voice, then I start rewriting the story. And that is when usually the structure is somehow there already. It's not like, I decide that, okay, I'm going to have this kind of a structure, but it's usually that the characters, then the story itself is kind of calling certain kind of structure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really true that until you get the voice, you don't have a book. You don't, because it's wonderful to get to know the characters, but you have to have that voice. And with Dog Park, it's such a strong narrative voice. This is the other thing, and it's so different from your other books. This is something that I think makes Dog Park a book that is going to really appeal to so many readers, because this is not a woman who is she's not a victim at all. She is someone who she makes a lot of choices that maybe you or I wouldn't make, but she still has her reasons. She's very, very strong. And that doesn't mean that she is always moral, whatever we call morality. It doesn't mean that she always does things that seem right in any culture, Western or Eastern, but it means she's very strong. And that's a different, I think, kind of thing than we sometimes see in women in fiction. Sometimes we see women who are there only to help the story along, or only to help the male characters along. And that is fortunately not something that you write about. You write about
no. I don't have supportive roles for women. for women, and actually that is I've always been interested in women's history and so on, but I didn't make a clear decision to write about women's stories. I was thinking that, yes, sure, these are important, but I live in Finland, and in Finland, for example, 50% of authors are female. So in that way, in Finnish literary culture, movie business is another matter, but in Finnish books, we don't really lack female characters. We have a lot of them. And it wasn't actually until my first translations came out, when I traveled to countries where the journalist asked me, why do you have a female protagonist? And it was a question for me that, I wasn't even thinking that it's a kind of, choice or a matter of question, like, why not? And what kind of characters should I have? Like,
why not? Yes.
Yes. So that's when I start, and also because this was a question that came that I was asked so many times the same question. So I understood that this is not just one particular journalist asking me, but this is like telling something about the equality in this country, or about the literary world of that country. What kind of stories do you have in the book? So I started then to ask, like, why shouldn't I have, or are female protagonists rare in your world? And there are less, it's like male characters tend to have more male protagonists, and in countries where there are more male authors, there are less female protagonists simply.
Yes.
So in that way, it does make sense. But also, so over the years, I also I've written sure about male, and when the doves disappeared, there's a male protagonist. But I understood that actually, it is important to have female protagonists, and simply the women whose stories is told in a way that it is not just supporting a male character or a male story. I understood, and also what I've understood is that it's kind of my duty as well, not when I think about the Finnish literature, because we have enough female characters, at least in books, but because I have a lot of translations, then that's also why I think that it is important to have female characterists and female protagonists.
I think that is so important, especially because I am reading so much more literature and translation, and we have such a chance, authors and readers who do communicate through translation, to see these other perspectives. So I don't think I don't want to impose that duty on you as an author, Sophie, but I'm glad that you feel it's really important. And I'm also glad that we have translators like Owen Witesman or Witesman, that his last
Witesman,
like Owen Witesman, who translate Finnish so well and are able to work with nuances, especially in a case like Dog Park, where you have very helpfully given a glossary of Ukrainian and Russian terms in the back of the book, so that the conversation among the characters can flow, and they can say, okranka, or, this particular kind of pastry and such. And it's really, really interesting. But I also know it's time for questions. I can keep talking. I'm sure Sophie is, probably happy to keep talking about some things, but it would be great to see some questions from those of you who have joined us about Dog Park or about Sophie's other books. So one thing I think I can continue with until maybe someone, is brave enough to type a question here is, we're talking about, the importance of bringing these stories forth, especially for societies that may not have as many women in, strong roles in their fiction. This story, we talked about this at the beginning. It's a story that could happen in a lot of different places. It is not just Ukraine that has corruption in its government. There are many places around the world that do. And the particulars here that you address, that you use, allow us to experience a place, experience a particular country. And so, we have a question, yes. And so my question, which will tie in with this one, it's perfect. Nancy Commons says, after reading Purge and Dog Park, I couldn't help but wonder where you find hope in the world, especially for women. And that is, Nancy, thank you, exactly where I was going, because there are so many dark places. But I think one of the things I've been saying that I found in Dog Park is I found hope in the narrator's agency, in her making decisions for herself. But where do you find hope?
Well, when you think about the women's situation like 50 years ago, then there's a lot of improvement, definitely. For example, already when you think about, the world 100 years ago, there were so many women who died at labor, for example.
Yes.
100 years ago, which is actually a very short period in the history of humankind. So many infants died, a woman who had 5 children, only one might, survive until the adulthood. And even though, the situation in Afghanistan is now very desperate for women, then, when you think about the percentages of literacy, then at least quite many women learn to read. And no matter what Taliban says, I'm sure they will, in secrecy, teach their girls to read at home, in private space. So in that way, there's a lot of excellent progress, good progress taking place in many fields. When you think about well, in Finland, almost all women are working women. We go to work, but that wasn't, the case 100 years ago. Now, almost in all countries in the world, women have a right to vote, for example. Even in those countries, of course, the right to vote is crucial for democracy, and there are many countries where people cannot practice their democracy. Right to vote. Yes. But at least, women have right to vote just as men. There are more. Pandemic caused a lot of is a very severe backlash for equality process and development, and also to girls' education. But it is definitely better than 50 years ago. So in that way, I find there's a lot of good things happening all the time.
We have another question. Melissa Gjelstad says, did you leave your research believing the fertility industry only exists as a manipulative force, Or did you see moments for agency within the industry in Ukraine and surrounding regions? I ask because I wonder if your novel can help to break stereotypes and stigmas for people who do choose assisted reproductive technologies and to work in these industries. It's a great question. Thank you, Melissa.
Oh, that's a good question. Definitely. I mean, I'm not against fertility treatments, surrogacy, or anything like that, but I do hope that there should be more reliable information available for everybody. That includes clients, the women involved, and also the children that will be born.
Yes.
Out of this system. Also, I'm sure that in the future, because there are hundreds or even thousands babies coming out from this system, I think that in the future, when those children will grow up, they are going to need also, some sort of support if they find out. And the thing is that even parents might control what the children know about their heritage, then DNA is something that doesn't actually lie. So so in that way, I'm not sure if secrecy is the best solution. But anyway, we also need international monitoring on free legal help, for example, and things like that. So there's plenty we can do, but if we only believe the beautiful ads that those agencies are, sharing, then we don't think that we need independent NGOs, for example, to help women involved. So in that way, I hope that, the more also we understand about the background of women involved in the business, the more we understand about what needs to be done. Simply, they are not women with means. Therefore, I think, for example, free legal assistance is definitely something that they should need. I want people to be more aware, simply so.
And it just occurs to me, it's so emotional. We had friends in the past who adopted, and they wound up adopting from Russia, but they had tried adopting from other Eastern European companies and had their hearts broken several times, because one of the problems is on the the couples who are looking for the child, who are looking for the fetus to implant, they are blinded without these controls and without these governmental, codes and things. And so it's so emotional, it's so difficult. And Melissa, I would say, especially, I don't know if you've read Dog Park already or not, but certainly there is room for improvement and for breaking those stereotypes and for allowing women who truly say, this is what I would like to do, to be able to do it with good legal assistance, good health care, and good after support. So it's a lot that goes into it. It's true.
I'm glad that you brought up the adoption, because the problem now is that because of the fertility industry is offering so many lucrative possibilities for those who want to have children but cannot have the children themselves, then the adoption numbers have really gone down. People are not as interested into adopting children than they used to be, which is a tragedy, because the number of children who actually would like to be adopted, it's not going down. There are more and more children who are just desperately looking for adopt parents they don't have. So in that way, that's definitely, and also children needing foster families, but they don't have the foster families because the parents are looking for a biological child.
A biological child who may also be a designer child.
Yes, exactly. So this is definitely this is a heartbreaking side effect of the development, this medical development of the industry, and also, of course, in many countries they have also refused to adopt children to foreign parents, like for example in Russia. So in that way, this adoption has also become a part of the political game and foreign politics, which is again heartbreaking, because those children are without hope, simply.
Yes, they are. And I have to ask you, I know we only have a minute or two here, and if anyone else has a question, please jump in. I am happy to have Sophie answer your question, but because this book is about Ukraine, and I know that you are really expressive in your dress and style. Is this a Ukrainian dress that you're...
Oh, this is the classical Ukrainian dress, vyshyvanka, which I think my protagonist is also wearing. But this is a special one because in that way that I have also Estonian colors.
Of course.
So this is uniting the Estonia and Ukraine.
That's absolutely wonderful that you're able to do that. And that they're so beautiful, the vyshyvanka, and so special, but I love them because they're also comfortable for women to wear.
Oh, yes, they are definitely. Yes.
It's not about forcing women into something really corsety or anything like that. So that's really special that you're showing the Ukraine solidarity with the Estonian. I love that. So if no one else has any questions, I'm just going to end with my asking the classic question, which is what comes next? If you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm working on a new novel, but I cannot say anything about that.
All
because,
right.
You have to keep it to yourself as long as you can.
That is good advice. And Nancy Commons says, I want to express my appreciation and admiration for your work, Sophie. Kitos Palyon.
Thank
Did
you.
I say that? Palyon? Palyon?
Palyon.
So this is my next thing is I'm going to start Duolingo Finnish lessons so that I get...
Wow. I'm impressed. Okay.
Well, we'll see. Maybe the next time I talk to you, I'll be able to say a little bit more. But thank you all so much for being here today and listening to Sofi Oksanen talk about Dog Park, which I really encourage you to buy a copy of and read. It is, I think, a very important and entertaining isn't the right word, but boy, you will not put it down. That's
thank you.
It is a really fantastic read. Thank you. And Kyle, I'll turn it back to you.
I just want to express my thanks for everyone tuning in. My sincere thanks for you, Bethanne, for asking such wonderful questions. And thank you so much, Sophia, for this wonderful piece of literature and for spending the day with us. I do hope we'll see everyone soon, either in person at Scandinavia House or virtually still. We are sort of in the process, hybriding about opening the building and offering virtual programs. So please do visit the website scandinavias.org for everything that we have on to offer. We are presenting a Norwegian book in 2 weeks called The Pastor. And we have a few more talks coming up in November and December. So please do visit the website, and we hope to see everyone soon. And thank you again for attending. Bye.
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 Bye.